Okay, so to understand my second part of my critique of the pickup community, you also need to understand something else: capitalism. So this video is going to go over the basics of capitalism. So, capitalism is simply when the means of production are owned privately by people called capitalists. This entails many things, which I will elaborate on in this video essay. And in reality, capitalism can't be simplified this much, but it explains these topics to people who are new to economics and political theory. In reality, a full explanation of capitalism is longer than a simple sentence. For now, it is important to understand that the means of production are simply anywhere that produces goods or that generates money for the property owner, the landowner, or the capitalist, which in some cases can be the same person. It's easier to think of the means of production as a factory, an office, a mine, a farm. Private ownership means that a small group of people, or one person, determines how the business is run. They determine the administrative side of things and control the workers of the business. Now that you hopefully understand the basics, it's now time to understand where capitalism comes from and why it matters, as well as explain the social conditions capitalism creates and how it affects you. Before capitalism, lords had complete control over their serfs. Lords were the landowners who appropriated land to serfs, and the serfs would make food and other goods for the lord, of which the lord would leave just enough for the serf to survive. Exploitation in feudalism was obvious, because a serf depended on the lord for protection, and also needed to produce value for him. The lords inherited legal privileges, which their subjects could never receive, and the subjects always had the threat of force looming over their head, reminding them that they are not free to do anything other than what their lord demands. In feudalism, this exploitation is primarily to increase the amount of consumption of the ruling class. It is simply so the ruling class can live a more luxurious life than the slaves or serfs. Only in some cases would the ruling class use their surplus of wealth to be set aside to purchase more slaves, or something else to enlarge the amount of exploitation possible, such as an army to invade another country, or land. In capitalism, exploitation and social interactions exist differently than under feudalism. Exploitation in capitalism serves to be invested to make more gains in the future. In other words, the increase of capital, or the valorization of capital, is the main reason of production and exploitation. A comfortable and luxurious life for the capitalist is simply a byproduct of this increase in capital, but not its main purpose. The workers, people who have to sell their labor for a wage to survive, are free, in the sense that there is no external force that compels them to sign a contract, and once signed can be annulled later. The workers are also equal to capitalists in the sense that there are no advantages to owning a large amount of land, and there are no such things as nobility. Workers can become a capitalist and vice versa. There's also no threat of force looming over the worker's head by the capitalist, unlike in feudalism, where lords could use force over their serfs as they pleased. So far, it seems as if capitalism seems to be exploitation-free, but this is not the case. These capitalists, like the ruling class before them, exploit the class underneath them, just not with the direct threat of violence. The worker, or wage-dependent laborer has to be hired by a capitalist to receive a wage. Otherwise, he will not be able to afford the means of subsistence required to survive. The value produced by a worker's labor on raw materials or a capitalist property produces an increased value of which the worker only receives a part of. The majority of the value made by the creation of a product by a worker is taken by the capitalist. This is called surplus value. The worker only receives payment equal to the amount of value needed for his or her survival and their own procreation. This is called a wage or a salary. The surplus value allows for the capitalist to enlarge his capital, and as a byproduct allows him to live a comfortable, luxurious life. The capitalist makes his money by extracting value which was not made by his labor, the surplus value as I just mentioned. This is exploitation, and it happens whether or not you have a high or low salary. This exploitation occurs as long as you don't have a direct decision in the administration of the business you work at. Unless you work in a cooperative or are a capitalist, you are being exploited. Capitalism not only puts constraints on the workers, but also on the capitalists that seem so greedy and powerful. While it might seem absurd to keep accumulating capital as an end in and of itself, it simply is not because of competition. Capitalists are forced into this movement of restless profiteering by competition with other capitalists. If accumulation is not carried on, then one's own enterprise is faced with the threat of being steamrolled by competitors who produce more cheaply or who manufacture better products. In simpler terms, if one wants to stay a capitalist, one must continue to increase and modernize production or face bankruptcy and become just another worker. Finally, the origins of capitalism are rooted in the 16th and 17th centuries, with merchants in foreign markets, specifically the New World, India, and the Indonesian islands. As Marx says in Capital Volume 1, the treasures captured outside Europe by undisguised looting, enslavement, and murder flowed back to the mother country and were turned into capital there. With the merchant capitalists bringing in capital and raw materials from the New World, capitalist production started to take off. Industrial capitalists were able to get cheap raw materials and were able to produce more and in turn build bigger facilities. After some time, most of Western Europe embraced the capitalist mode of production, and then the rest of the world. Now it seems as if capitalism has no limits. With the fall of the Soviet Union and China, only North Korea seems to stand in opposition. Although it seems as though capitalists want to expand in North Korea, considering all the increased tensions by the USA. To summarize, capitalism involves unequal social relations between the propertied class, capitalists, and the capitalist-dependent workers, as well as constraints on the system itself. Capitalism arose from technological advancements and the addition of capital from exploited lands all around the world. Capitalism also was able to flourish as power flowed out of the nobility and into the banks, merchants, and industrialists who increased their influence and power. In capitalism, the main purpose is the valorization of capital. Its only motive is the increase of profit for future investment to increase capital. The reason this occurs is because capitalists need to do this to avoid bankruptcy from competing capitalists. Capitalists own the means of production, factories and offices. which are the places where workers can earn a wage to survive. Without a wage, a worker cannot survive. Formally, even though a worker needs a wage to survive and can only get it from a capitalist, both classes are considered equal and free. Both of these classes were not born into nobility, and capitalists can't force workers to work for them by force. Unlike under feudalism, workers are not the capitalist subjects, even though workers are still dependent on capitalists for survival. With social relations and ideologies built around capitalism, there seems to be nothing that could stop capitalism's expansion, and workers everywhere will continue to be exploited. Exploited. The workers will not enjoy the fruits of their own labor as long as most of it, the surplus value, goes to a capitalist, who simply is the personification of capital. Overall, this essay has simply gone over the basics of capitalism. The book, An Introduction to the 3 volumes of Karl Marx's Capital by Michael Heinrich, will go over in more detail the other aspects of capitalism. I definitely suggest you read it. It is an easy read for people who are intimidated or new to economic and political theory. Anyways, thanks for watching, and my critique of the pickup community will continue, and hopefully you enjoy videos similar to this, and I'll be doing a lot more stuff. Please subscribe. Bye.